Game one is in the books, and Indiana men's basketball is 1-0 after an 80-61 win over SIUE. Welcome back to another episode of the House Hoosier podcast, brought to you by the Field of 68 Podcast Networks, alongside Ian Plaskoff. I'm Austin Platt. Regular season game number one officially in the books, and IU comes away with a 19-point win. We'll recap all of that, talk a little bit about what happened in the exhibition against Marion, kind of tie everything together, as now we have seen Indiana in their first 40 official minutes of the season. A lot to dissect, a lot of things we learned, and still a lot of things we'd like to see improve. So a lot of good talking points here. Ian, it's just good to see Indiana not have a nail biter like we saw last year in the first game, and to not have to worry about the under four timeout, about potentially losing. I guess your first takeaways after the 19-point win over SIUE.
Well, Austin, you say it wasn't much of a sweat through that game, but there were times where it was getting a little bit close. And I think it was 27-27 after that Rayshon Taylor three. And that was a little bit concerning, but the second half was much better. Um, but obviously, what caught all the headlines for this game was Mackenzie Mgbako, 31 points, career high. Only missed four shots, was 13 of 17 from the field and 4 of 5 from three. He took over in the first half and kept it going in the second. And he's really what took Indiana from one level to the next in this game. And he's what carried them over the top. He looked confident. He looked like an NBA player, to be fully honest with you. Um, and the development, as we've seen in a couple exhibitions, and then in this game in particular, the development from last year, not only with the shooting, but also defensively and in his playmaking and just the effort level. That's what stood out to me about Mackenzie Mgbako, and he deservedly so has the headlines for this game.
We talked so much about this last year, but the ability for him to score in different ways, times where, he's curling off of a screen and going to the basket, other times where he's in the right spot to grab an offensive rebound. It just felt like wherever Mbaku was, it was always at the right time. And, at one point, I mean, after, Indiana was off to a slow start, as you mentioned, and Mbaku really got the offense going. And then he went and sat on the bench, and I was at the game, and there were people around us like, what is he doing sitting on the bench? I get it. This is a deep team, but it's like you have to have your best shooter on the floor. And it's pretty clear after watching this game, and I think from what we expected in the offseason, carrying over, Mbako's your best shooter. He is your best pure shooter on this team. The 3-point mark from last year, he's great at the free throw line as well, over 80% last year. You have to have him on the floor as much as possible. And I know defensively he's not up to Mike Woodson's standards, but I mean, you just have to have number 21 on the floor as much as possible. And I think we finally saw that in the second half after the rotations kind of figured themselves out after the first half was very shaky.
Yeah, this is a team that's still trying to figure out rotations and pairings and lineups, and we'll get into that later throughout this episode. But when Mbaku left the floor in the first half, he was gone for, it wasn't too long, but it felt like a very long time because the offense just went completely stagnant with him on the bench. There was no shot creating ability. The shots from deep weren't falling. And as soon as he came back in, it was night and day offensively. And he had a good block. He played some solid defense. 9 rebounds is pretty high for him on the glass as well. It was just an all-around great game. And the thing that stood out to me, I said this earlier, it wasn't just the points, it was the effort level on the defensive end, on the rebounding end, and just making the right plays. Last year, we didn't see at times Mgbako put a lot of effort in on the glass or diving for loose balls. He kind of just stood on the perimeter or came around a pin down and took a shot. But this was a full, complete game for Mackenzie Mgbako. And I think what Mike Woodson and the coaching staff is going to have to figure out is what needs to happen around him lineup wise to maximize his production on the floor and also maximize his teammates' production on the floor.
Yeah, the rotations is something we'll get to because that was a very confusing, just kind of completely throwing five different guys out after, the first kind of the first few minutes and the first few media timeouts. 19 first half points from Mgbako. He only played 12 minutes, and he finished the game 31 points in 28 minutes. Did have 4 fouls, but 9 rebounds. Could have very well had a 10th in there for a double-double. He had a few of those, I believe, last year. But everything was great from him. Elsewhere, still pretty good up and down the stat sheet. Umar Ballo finished with 15 points. He had a struggle in that first half, really came on strong late. Malik Renew had 15. Miles Rice had 11. Kind of looking at the strengths of this game, obviously Mgbako is the first thing, but free throw shooting was good. It felt like some of the guys were figuring it out. With this team, they have to learn that this is going to be, this is, no one has to do too much, essentially. There were times where Miles Rice was doing a little razzle dazzle with the basketball, with fast break and in transition. That wasn't working. Other guys just have to realize this has to be, this is a team sport, and Indiana has to play as a team because there's not, the one, like, I don't think there's one like true superstar on this team. There's not the Trace Jackson Davis, and there's not the Cleo Ware. You're not going to necessarily have one lottery pick where it's like, all right, this is the guy our offense has to run through. And I think we saw that a little bit with the first 10 minutes or so. The offense kind of wasn't really clicking. A lot of guys were getting the touch. Different guys were bringing the ball up the floor. There wasn't a true identity, and I don't think there is going to be a true identity to start this season. And I think that's where these first few games you have to start to figure that out a little bit because it took Miles Rice definitely a few media timeouts to get stuff underneath from him, get the legs underneath out, and get the cobwebs out. Even though he looked pretty good in the exhibition games, but there's going to be a lot of things this offense needs to kind of figure out because the bench didn't look great, and when those four guys I believe came off the bench, it was pretty ugly.
Yeah, Austin, I think this is one of those situations, and you see this a lot, both in the pros and in college. More in the pros, though. It's one of those situations where it could be anybody's night, and that's okay. It was a bit of an off night for some players that you expected to be a little bit better, like Rice, even Ballo up until the end. Um, but Mgbako picked up the slack, and I'd have to imagine as the season goes on, we're going to see games where that turns into Malik Renew. We're going to see games where that turns into Ballo. We're going to see Rice games. This is just a team that is so deep, and like you said, nobody has to do too much, but sometimes there's going to be a player that has to pick up the slack, and this team has the potential to do that with capable scores. Today it was Mgbako. I'm sure it'll happen again, but I'm sure it's going to be somebody else as the season goes on. And it's just going to be kind of natural, I feel like. But on your talk about the bench, um, that was a really um, interesting in a bad way. Look at the bench. I mean, bench players not named Trey Galloway were 1 for 8 for 2 points, and that was Bryson Tucker. Galloway played really well. I expected him to get the start actually instead of Carlisle, and that's something I do want to talk about later. But only 4 minutes for Gabe Cupps, which is a little bit expected with the guard depth. But what really was interesting to me was 2 minutes for Langdon Hatton. Now, granted, he did not play too well on the defensive end or on the rebounding end, didn't take a shot. And not playing too well is a bit of an understatement. Um, but this bench unit's going to have to figure it out. And then Luke Goody is still pretty cold from three, which is what he was brought here to do. But again, it's game one. Can't really overreact too much, but this bench has some questions to it.
Yeah, I was questioning Mike Woodson's decision early on. I think he brought four of the starters off. This we've talked about in the offseason. People have said let's try and play as someone else is the number, someone else is the four. Let's play four out. Let's basically let's play a little bit smaller. Let's put in Baco, someone like that at the four. That's not going to happen. I don't see that happening. Renew and Ballo shed the floor quite a bit. Renew had 28 minutes. They both guys had 28 minutes. So basically, you slice it. I think for all of those, I think 2 minutes that Hatton was on, neither of those two were on, and for the other, I guess 38, I think at least one of the two were on at all times. But I mean, we just have to get over the fact that I mean, Woodson's not going to change the way he goes about this. This offense, I think, is still very good with both on the floor, and Ballo makes Renew more dangerous and vice versa. But just the way he brought off the four guys, and I think he left. It was either Carlisle or Rice. It was one of those two that he left on. It didn't make any sense. There was no offense. No one. The offense wasn't going through anybody. Everyone looked lost, and Hatton just couldn't bring down a rebound. And it was just frustrating that you start off so well. Defensively, they started off very well, and then everything just kind of imploded. And you mentioned it was 27-27 before Indiana went on a 15 to 3 run to end the first half. It's just the rotations need to be better. Just because you have a deep bench doesn't mean you can just throw four bench guys out there and hope for the best. I mean, there's a reason why in practice the starters are the five guys and the bench players are separate. And I know, one unit makes the other one better and whatnot, but you just that can't happen. And you get away with it against a weak team, and you're going to get away with it in a weak non-conference schedule for the most part, considering South Carolina, the big home game in the non-conference, lost to North Florida in a bye game. So, I mean, you're going to get away with it to a certain degree, but just the rotations were frustrating in this game. And I think it was just a matter of time before Woodson realized we got to have Mgbako out there, and we got to have, for the most part, our best guys out there. And even Caden Carlisle, who didn't have a bucket, I thought played very well defensively, was in the right spots, came down with 6 rebounds, had 3 assists. I thought he provided some really good things, even though he took some shots that maybe were a little ill-advised. But you just got to figure out the rotations. And I think to some degree, you're going to have to play small at some point, especially if Mbako is going to shoot the ball anywhere like he did on Wednesday night.
Yeah, Austin, this felt like the rotations. It felt like something you would see last year, with the drop off from the starters to the bench, and that's something we talked about in the season preview, but in a positive way, in that there wouldn't be as much of a drop off, but it's a matter of how you do it. If you take all your starters out and put in four bench guys who need a starter to help them get buckets and create a shot, it's likely not going to work too well. And that's what we saw in this game. And we saw that last year with, when Cups and CJ Gunn and Caleb Banks were all in the lineup at the same time, Peyton Sparks at the beginning of the year. And it just lacked production. And I think that, I mean, now granted, the bench players all had an off night. Um, and that's probably something that is going to get fixed over time, at least one player by one. Um, but if there's a time to do it, it's game one of the non-conference schedule and figure it out and see if it works. Um, and then on your point about Carlisle, I do think he played great. I think he was probably the best perimeter defender of the game that Indiana had. The intensity he had on ball and off ball out on the perimeter was just really fun to watch. Um, and didn't score, got some good looks up, didn't find the bottom of the net. But the decision to start Carlisle, which I see why now after the game, looking back, but starting him over your fifth year senior in Trey Galloway was a bit of an interesting decision, and it's prioritizing offense over defense or defense over offense in the case of Carlisle. But both played well in their own respects, Galloway especially at the end of the game. And I do want to hear your thoughts on who will be, who do you think will be the starting two as the season goes on?
We've seen this before where Woodson doesn't really change things up, and I think he figured out that you need someone who's a good facilitator and or a scorer off the bench. And we've seen it in years past, and just didn't have that player to go to where, if something was going wrong, you had someone like Tamar Bates is the first guy that comes to mind. He was someone who could come off the bench and make an impact. Tamar obviously would be offensively make an impact. And even last year at times, at the beginning of the year, like Gabe Cupps could provide you a defensive spell or like an Anthony Walker or something like that. And I think Galloway does it on both ends to an extent. And I mean, just the 9 assists show you that he doesn't have to do it all this year. And I think Galloway has played his best in an Indiana uniform when he does come off the bench. He's the one that will, be rolling on the ground, trying to pick up loose balls, doing the little things right, grabbing rebounds, making shots when he needs to, making passes when he needs to guys on the perimeter. I just think that his role, while it's not as big, I think in the general scope is bigger for the team's success, considering what he can do and the way he works with everybody. It works really well, and I mean to have a captain come off the bench doesn't sound straightforward and isn't something you see every day. But I think the way he played off the bench was huge. He hit a three. I think hit both the shots he took. got to the free throw line. So I'm fine with Galloway coming off the bench if Carlisle is consistently as good as he is defensively. And some of the shots will hit. He wants to step into those long twos. He's not necessarily a big 3-point shooter. Um, and he'll do well, I think, off the pick and roll. But I'm fine with it. There's nothing wrong with it. I want to see someone come off the bench who I can trust. And we saw that, I think, in Galloway's second year back in the 21-22 season where Galloway came off the bench and played really well. And that's why, and to start the year, that next year when Hood Schifino came in, he was coming off the bench as well until Xavier Johnson got hurt, and it worked well. So I like it. Long story short, I like Galloway coming off the bench.
I think it worked well, and I think the way that Mike Woodson approached it worked well as well. I mean, yes, he's coming off the bench, but if you bring him in at the right times, it's as if he's a starter playing with the rest of the starters. And we saw that at the end of the game. Galloway had 9 assists in the game, and I think four of them came in the final, what, like 4 minutes, something like that, the pick and roll with Ballo. And that looked really promising because if you want Galloway in late game situations with the starters, I mean, he's obviously proven that he can do it over these past few years, and he showed that he can develop a little bit of chemistry with new players like Ballo and Rice. Also knocked down a three, which is big because Galloway's 3-point shooting has been a little bit on and off for the past few years, but he's one of those players that will thrive in any role that's given to him. And I'm with you, Austin. I like him coming off the bench in big time games in the conference matches or matchups. Um, I feel like we could see him get more minutes, maybe still coming off the bench, but just in more of an enhanced role, just because of that experience in the Big Ten. But only time will tell.
Yeah, we'll have to see. Obviously, first game got a lot of things to work out. I think Woodson kind of figured out what works and what doesn't work, which I think is what practice should have been like the last several months. But in the end, I mean, basically, you got to, it's two thumbs up in a game that was tied at one point. Everyone's thinking about to the first three games of last year. You play well in the second half, they're up by as much as 20, maybe even more than that. You end up winning by 19. Yeah, the pick and roll worked really well. Those passes and Ballo, I guess let's talk about him. Um, Momentarily. 15 points in 28 minutes, 6 of 10 shooting, 3 of 4 from the free throw line, somewhere where he's really struggled. 6 rebounds, which is a little bit eye-opening. 1 assist, 4 turnovers, just 1 foul in 28 minutes. Took him a while to figure things out. And we saw at times Renew in this game, gets double teamed and wouldn't pass it out and just kind of muscle his way to the basket. He willed his way to like 6 points in that game. Ballo's going to have to be one, I think, isn't as quick, isn't as mobile or shifty as Renew is, even though he does work well with that left hand as well. Whenever that double comes during that lob inside, I think Ball is going to have to find a way to kick the ball out. And he looked a little bit slow. Had trouble boxing out, had trouble grabbing rebounds over guys he should have. And I think on the offensive glass is something we put down as one of the negatives that Indiana did not do a very good job against SIUE, allowing 16 offensive rebounds. Indiana only grabbed 9, and they were lucky that the second chance points wasn't completely one-sided. Indiana won that 14-13, but Bala looked okay, I think, at best, but had some really good moves at the end to kind of make up for it.
Yeah, I think the stats are a little bit misleading for Ballo because you see 15 points and 6 rebounds or whatnot, and a lot of that was at the end of the game. Um, and I think some of the factors that played into that was that Indiana tried to play faster than it was used to. We saw Miles Rice, in a blur, go to the other like, end to end on the court, coast to coast, and Ballo looked tired. I will say, he wasn't as powerful in the paint as he is coined to be. Um, and the pace slowed down at the end of the game, and that's where I really saw him start to thrive in that pick and roll with Trey Galloway. Um, he's going to have to adjust to that if Indiana continues to play fast. And with Miles Rice running the point, we've seen it in the exhibitions. We saw it in game one. He likes to play fast and he likes to work fast in the pick and roll. So Ball's going to have to adjust. That'll take some time. I'm not worried about him at all. Solid performance from the big man. I think he figured some things out. Um, and, you know, 6 rebounds against SIUE is not great, But again, it's game one, and I'm in the camp of let him figure things out, let him adjust to what Indiana basketball is, and he'll be just fine.
Yeah, I still think I want to see more times where Ball is just as the five and see how that works with the spacing down low and see if you can get someone cutting to the basket to make it easier for him to pass it out. But yeah, no, he was definitely had a very quiet first half. I think only 5 points, really struggled. But yeah, I think that just goes with the pace Indiana's going to play. They're going to play fast, which isn't to Ballo's. It doesn't suit Ballo very well, which is maybe why you want Renew on the floor at the same time if you're going to play fast to have that second option down low should Umar get tired. So those are kind of most of the things we liked. Free throws, another good thing. You have to be pretty pleased. 14 of 17. On the other end, SIUE was 6 for 13. Indiana fans got their French fries and the first time of asking this year, which was fun to see. Free fries, say that 5 times fast. But no, you got to, obviously make your shots at the charity stripe. But overall, the starters look pretty good. I think overall, I thought they meshed pretty well together. Still some communication issues, still some rotation issues, which we saw really at the beginning of last year as to why Indiana gave up so many points. And offensive rebounding wasn't great, but in the end, you win this game by 19. Good for the metrics. Indiana has to win, most of these games by 15 plus points in these home non-conference games, and you did that. So, kind of three claps for that. But overall, I think that we kind of covered most of the things we liked in that game. Now let's go to the negatives. We already mentioned the offensive glass. 3-point shooting. It has to be better. If you're going to take a lot of threes this year, and Indiana didn't take too many, 6 for 16, but Tucker off the bench. Didn't look great. Didn't look too comfortable from three. Goody missed two, but you're gonna have to let him shoot threes. And Baca was 4 of 5. Carlisle 0 for 3. Even Renew took a three, which you're fine with, and Rice knocked down 1 of 2. But 3-point shooting, I think, has to be better in the sense that you need to get. I mean, 37.5% isn't terrible, but if you're gonna take threes, take more of them and a little bit more purpose because it seemed like a few of them were maybe a little bit forced.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the numbers, it's 6 of 16, it's 37.5%. But Mackenzie Mgbako was 4 out of 5 of those. The rest of the team was 2 for 11. Um, I personally would have would have liked to see more volume from three, especially in a game against SIUE. There were some quality looks in there. Um, and there were some not quality looks in there, and I think that was Tucker hoisted up a few, Carlisle a few as well, and that's just young players trying to make a difference in the game. Um, I would have liked to see more volume. Got to make your threes, um, especially if you're lacking production inside and you're struggling with turnovers and offensive rebounds. Which kind of brings us into the next thing that we notice in turnovers, 16 of them for Indiana. Miles Rice with 5, Umar Balla with 4, and then Trey Galloway and Mackenzie Mgbako each with 2. They led the way. But the Hoosiers were very fortunate because SIUE only managed to score 14 points off of those turnovers. So they escaped a little bit there, but 16 is not something you want to see.
No, that's a first game issue as well. Just the double teaming that we've seen a lot in the post led to a lot of turnovers, and I just think communication with this newer group is something that's going to have to improve, especially down low. When that ball goes up to the low block for Umar Ballo, and there's help coming from the backside, there needs to be someone there to yell and call it out because there's too many times where they got doubled up, and immediately the ball gets stripped away, or Ballo or Renew off balance to try and just throw the ball to a teammate, and it ends up getting picked off. And then sometimes you're just playing too fast. Miles Rice had the kind of a few of the Xavier Johnson turnovers. You're just playing way too fast, and Rice has to keep the game in front of him, which at times he didn't. But it's first game stuff. It's what happens when you play fast. You're going to have turnovers, but Fast break points, Indiana had only 12 of them, and for the number of turnovers you have, that's not a great number. But keep the game grounded, keep the game in front of you, and you only need to increase the pace when you have to. This isn't a team I don't think that's going to play fast a ton, but they're going to be good when they play fast. They have to be efficient when they do, and be mindful of obviously the consequences that can come with picking up the pace. But I want to see this team play fast. We want to see more offense. We want to see more tempo. We want to see a little bit more kind of a meaning behind the way the offense moves. And you definitely have that with Galloway or Rice. Carlisle maybe not as much, but Rice is so crafty, but I think just at times was way ahead of himself. And maybe you just get that with the first game, the animosity and a little bit of the adrenaline pumping as well.
Yeah, I mean, there were times last year where it felt like the possession was just 25 seconds of ball reversals on the perimeter and then a random shot that didn't really have much meaning to it. Um, if you play a fast brand of basketball, and I feel like I can be pretty confident saying this as a Pacer fan myself, if you play a fast brand of basketball and you play it well, it is extremely hard to defend. It gets the defense tired, it gets them guessing and forces them to make quick decisions. And especially in college, that's not something you see too often. And now, especially if you have Mackenzie Mgbako shooting the ball like he did, and scoring the way he did, if you can get Miles Rice to consistently and accurately take care of the ball and distribute it and also score himself, um, and get other players involved, this is going to be a tough team to stop. They just have to do it without turning the ball over. They have to do it at the right times. There were times against SIUE where there was a transition look, and Indiana had numbers, and Miles Rice would just dart down the court and try and make a layup through contact and do it all himself and go coast to coast in like 2 seconds. Um, so you got to pick and choose, and you got to make smart decisions when you have numbers, when you have guys around you, and also read the defense a little bit smarter. And that comes with time, especially with the new team that's trying to develop some chemistry. But if they can get it clicking and play a fast brand of offense, it's not something that teams in the Big Ten usually do. And I think that's what could set Indiana apart, when conference play hits.
You think of teams that played fast that worked well. I think of Iowa. That's the first team with the speed they played at, the way they got up and down the floor from a few years ago. That's the team you think of. And Indiana doesn't have that. I don't think the shooting to quite match that, but you just think of the way Iowa ran, kind of gas teams out and at times ran them off the floor. Worked well, and I just you have to be smart when you do it. And if it does happen, then maybe you need the right personnel on the floor as well to do that because you just can't do that with Renew and Ballo on the floor at the same time. I guess that's everything I kind of wanted to touch on, Ian. Kind of going back to the Marion game, which I didn't watch a ton of. It seemed pretty straightforward, but there was no Anthony Leal in this game, out with an injury. So interesting to see how he goes into the fold. If he's kind of, you think Galloway's the first guard off the bench. Maybe Leal is second, and you don't see as much Gabe Cupps minutes. But we have to figure out really, is Langdon Hatton really worth it and trustworthy as that backup center to come off the bench, or does Indiana need to think about maybe only starting one of Renew or Ballo? But it feels like both of them are just too good to keep on the bench, and neither of them were really in foul trouble. Renew picked up like 3 fouls in 6 minutes, which was a little bit concerning at the very end, and they were, rather I think all three of them were very avoidable. But just the rotations is the biggest worry I have to this point. And is Hatton the real deal? And kind of if you bring Gabe Cupps on, what is his role? Because it looked like he was just out there to give other guys rest and basically just get his cardio in. It almost seemed like, which should not be happening considering how much he played last year. But it'll be interesting to see when Leo comes back. We don't really know the timetable yet, but kind of what he's going to, what he adds, and obviously he's great defensively as well. You kind of think of him almost like Carlisle in that sense, where he can come off and provide some great defense. But just the rotations is something I need to see change headed into the next game against Eastern Illinois.
Yeah, and there's plenty of time to figure that out in the non-conference. I did notice, I mean, Hatton in his 2 minutes was really struggling out there, and he was on a really short leash after getting pulled after 2 minutes. I do think he'll get some more time to figure it out as the non-conference schedule goes on, maybe with some different players around him. But it's going to be important to figure out what his role is. And then same for Gabe Cupps. That's going to be dependent on Anthony Leal. And I may even say Ja'Kai Newton when he gets fully healthy because we don't know what his role is going to be yet. But there's still plenty of things for this team to figure out. We've talked about lineups and pairings and units. They could go any which way with so many players and pieces on this team. Um, and it's just a matter of figuring out what works, and that's what the non-conference is for. But this bench has some questions to it, and the questions will need to get answered pretty quickly to figure things out ahead of Atlantis, because that's especially with that South Carolina loss, Atlantis is really the ride or die of this non-conference season, and the bench has to figure it out by then.
Yeah, I mean, Indiana has one game against Eastern Illinois on Sunday at noon. Then they have that game against South Carolina, which is, the marquee non-conference game at Assembly Hall, even though it's already lost a lot of its luster, considering the Gamecocks lost their season opener against North Florida at home. Quickly looking at Eastern Illinois, they've already played Illinois this season. They lost 112 to 67. They got a win against a D3 team on Wednesday, the same night that IU started their season. But they got, they lost their top scorer, guys coming in from every which way. Actually, Marty Simmons, their head coach, was at SIUE on a previous stop. So that's interesting to see what he picks up from watching some IU film. But last year, the Panthers 14 and 18, were 8 and 10 in the OVC. The year before, they were 9 and 22. So it's a team that is definitely still rebuilding, and they have guys coming from all over the place. So they did score 97 points last night against a D3 team. Six guys were in double figures, but should kind of be the same thing. I know Indiana was favored by like 28 points against SIUE. I don't know what the line is for Eastern Illinois. It shouldn't matter. You should win these games by 15 to 20 points. And this hopefully this game, in addition to building off of the SIUE game, shows that the non-conference this year are going to be much different because you really need the metrics on your side headed to Atlantis.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you just got to win them by 15 to 20, like you said. But the thing that I want to see improve from the SIUE game, not basketball related, the crowd at Assembly Hall
Yeah.
was a little bit disappointing for SIUE. I mean, I personally wasn't even able to go myself because, believe it or not, I had schoolwork to do. But just watching, I mean, students were leaving early. The fans were not filling the seats in the lower level. Um, Now, do we credit this to football season? I'm not sure, but I mean, we Indiana has the luxury to say it now. So, do want to see the crowd improve. Eastern Illinois is going to be very similar to SIUE in that it's just a non-conference game. You got to win. You got time to figure things out with your lineups and just see what happens out there. But Indiana shouldn't have any problems with that.
I actually thought about not going, and in the last second, I was convinced to buy a ticket and move my way down into the lower bowl, and actually had a pretty good seats. But you're right, the student section they filled up, but it wasn't full. By tip off, there was nobody in the upper deck and in the higher bowl. The lower bowl wasn't filled. There wasn't a ton of energy. There was kind of the nervy sense when it was 27-27, and that Mgbako defensive play where he picked off that pass, and I think went down for an and one on the other end, really got the crowd going. But even in the second half, as Indiana was essentially in cruise control, the crowd really wasn't there. And obviously, it's a new environment for everybody. First game, not everyone's going to go. And overall, just the non-conference schedule, just it doesn't feel like the fans are going to be there. You don't have that game to look out for in the non-con. And Sunday at noon is obviously not a fantastic time. And obviously, it all depends on what happens on Saturday with football. But football is just carrying everything right now at IU and into the basketball. I mean, I don't even know. It's like when will the basketball team really like take shape as the center point? Because at this point in the past few years, it's like, oh my God, thank God we're at basketball season. And now it's like, well, I mean, when does basketball season like officially start for the students on campus? Because it's like, well, until football loses, and even if they lose, they'll probably might still be in the playoffs. So there's so much to worry about. But you're right, the fans do need to be better. And it just there wasn't quite that vibe you really feel at other games, and even the season openers. There's just the anticipation of being back for a basketball season is there, and this team has a ton of anticipation. So it's like the fans should be better. The students I think have to be better. And that was sure, being tied at 27 with what, like 5 minutes to go in the first half, whatever it was. It doesn't help, but I mean, you still should stay, right? It's an 8 o'clock game. I get it, it's a late tip, fine, but if you're gonna go, then stay at least until the final media timeout, and then beat the traffic. So you're right that's a very good point about the attendance in that game. And 8 o'clock tips stink. I get it. A lot of people there, obviously want to come directly from work, but family obviously takes precedent for a lot of people, and I guess for studious people like you, I guess schoolwork comes first as well.
Yeah, I have a date here for when I think basketball season will officially start. That'll be January 21st, 2025, the day after the College Football National Championship.
That's okay. Bold. You're maybe. I mean, who knows? I don't know. Kind of how obviously, and we're a week behind this year, so we don't get back on campus until like the 11th or 12th or something like that. Regardless, we'll see how it goes. But bottom line, Indiana is 1-0. Took care of business against SIUE. We'll be back next week. There's no game next week. In the middle of the week, it's that Sunday Eastern Illinois, and then the following Saturday afternoon against South Carolina. So we'll be back to break down that, maybe bring on a guest to preview the Gamecocks. And game number three is the big one that hopefully the fans will be ready for. I think it's a 3 o'clock the following Saturday, which is the bye week. So let's hope the fans will be ready for that one. But for this episode and episode number three here in the 24-25 season, for Ian, I'm Austin. We'll talk to you next time on the House of Hoosier podcast. Be sure to follow us on socials. We now have an Instagram as well. Is it the same handle, Ian? House_Hoosier?
I think it's House of Hoosier, straight up.
There you go. So we'll be posting clips there from every episode. So give us a follow on Twitter and Instagram. And obviously, if you're listening, there's a YouTube version on the Field of 68 podcast network, and vice versa. If you want to listen to us on the commute, and the Friday commute, either to or from work, we are on Spotify and an audio